I'm sitting around drinking delicious fruit juice from the fruit tumba that I've just tried for the first time and snacking on cheesy crackers. I'm visiting my partner's family in Bolivia, and we're at one of the many very relaxed family dinners, maybe you know them, where conversations stretch long into the evening and no one is in a rush to get from appetizers to main course to dessert to coffee. The conversation is about politics, the economy of Bolivia, the protests and blockades by miners at that time, and the relative livability of life in Bolivia compared to neighboring countries. My partner's uncle is a journalist, Raul Peñaranda, and he interjects, says migrating to a different country these days is like changing rooms on the Titanic. And it really stays with me. Migrating to a different country these days is like changing rooms on the Titanic. It feels like a pretty true thing in some ways. I hear it with lots of privilege, US citizen privilege, having lived in the US my whole life, a country that we know has many, many realities, a country where companies own whole cities and affording day-to-day life can feel like a setup and rights are being eroded daily. And also a country where there are more roads and sewer systems and potable water than in some countries, where there are functional schools if you can overcome redlining and discrimination, at least in some communities. And when I hear Uncle Raul's words, I also hear them in the context of this political moment, this moment when it comes to our dreams of justice, where it feels very hard to keep dreaming and to protect our dreams. Feels hard to be queer and trans and go to clubs and access healthcare and survive and thrive. It feels hard to have an abortion, which is healthcare. It feels hard to be alive and not be afraid of being shot. It feels hard to live on land, not be afraid of climate chaos in whatever way that reaches us. It feels hard to wonder if we'll be able to teach about race in schools to our kids, or take our kids to drag queen story time, or say the word gay out loud, or read books that are now banned that didn't used to be, or protest in ways that are now criminalized that didn't used to be. I'm not a political theorist, and maybe there are those of you in the congregation who are and will have interesting things to share. But my understanding is that in a lot of ways, we are living in a time of backlash against our values for justice and for community. Some people understand backlash as a time of repression that follows a time of uprising. Those who write about the stages of social movements sometimes talk about an enduring crisis that comes to a peak, and then there's a contraction, an evolution, and a new normal. Some folks talk about the level of disillusionment that can happen in the contraction. Beautiful Trouble is a resource that I highly recommend on building social movements for justice. And they write about contraction. After achieving a few victories, you may find that momentum stalls, backlash and repression increase, and internal divisions become more pronounced. People within your movement may speak of burnout, disillusionment. Personal and political conflicts may rise to the surface. They say it's time to turn to the tools that can help you foster well-being and safe spaces for emotional recovery. Help folks understand this phase is an expected turn, an opportunity to analyze progress and consolidate wins. I don't know if this feels familiar to any of you. For some of us, maybe very familiar. For others, maybe not so much. The organizers that I learned about theories of social movements from also talked about co-optation, in addition to backlash, as some of the stages of social movement. Co-optation when groups not actually aligned with our values use our words or slogans or visuals or calls to action, email lists, maybe even organizations for their own end. Like when a company uses the slogan Black Lives Matter to try to sell more fancy soap or something like that. Backlash, I think in this context, when white supremacist, misogynist, anti-LGBT groups, pro-gun groups are building a movement against our movements for liberation and thriving for all, using our wins and power to stoke fear and action. The theme of our worship series this month is justice. And usually I love talking about the work of justice. I've been part of some kind of justice work, faith-based, youth-led, work around housing, prisons, and now immigration and incarceration, my whole adult career, which alarmingly for me is almost the past 20 years. And I find myself these days not feeling like my own dreams of justice are very dreamy. Will fascism and climate collapse ultimately win? How can I invite people to join the groups and movements that we need to survive when the day in and day out grind of fundraising, board meetings, local, state, and federal politics, interpersonal dynamics, organizations behaving badly has me wondering each day if it's worth it? And if I'm honest, my relationship to social justice work these days often feels like a long-term committed relationship that has lost a bit of its zing. I go to the meetings and plan the work and talk to the people and answer the phone and show up when I'm asked to, because I've made promises, made commitments to this process of liberation and transformation. I believe in the vows I've made, and so I'm living them out, but it doesn't feel as fun as it once did. Like we've forgotten how to have date nights and giggle together and go on vacation together. Sometimes it does feel like Uncle Raoul snidely said that night, that we really are on the Titanic and there's no pretending we can right the ship. I truly hope that many of you and maybe many in your community feel differently. And if you do, we need you to raise your voice and tell us all about it, because we need you. And if you feel some of this, like your dreams for justice are under attack, like you're very tired, like our offerings feel small to meet the needs of this world, please know you are not alone. There are so many places where the work of justice is strong and breaking through. I think of Iran and China. I think of people mobilizing against the police murders in Memphis and Atlanta, and right here where I live in Eastern Massachusetts. When I scroll on social media and see the thousands of people mobilizing in different ways and read of their sacrifices and the brilliant strategies to sing this song or choose this visual or make this demand, I do feel the power of our collective dreams for justice. And I also know that no movement does not experience contraction, disillusionment, co-optation, backlash. So I try to remember that, like seasons, movements come in cycles. There's no way around it. There are springs, there are summers, there are winters, there are falls, there are rainy seasons and dry seasons. There's uprising, peak, contraction, evolution. And our work is to protect our dreams. Our work as people of faith is to remember that there is a world beyond our imagining, beyond the one we live in the day-to-day. And as we protect our dreams, we protect each other as we move toward the next moment. Tracy Rosenthal, co-founder of the Los Angeles Tenants Union, in their book, Abolish Rent, says, "We make our community by defending it." And that has certainly been my experience in fighting side by side with folks who are in immigration detention for their freedom, in taking care of each other in the streets at a protest, in showing up at each other's sites of struggle with money and presence. That when we defend each other, we can take a random group of people, all fighting the same fight, and turn us into an us, and a we into an ours. Some will say we are winning, that our values of justice and liberation are winning. And some of those wins are real. This year here in Massachusetts, we won driver's licenses for all people, regardless of immigration status. We won a fairer tax for millionaires, and from that tax, we'll be able to better fund our schools. And I'll say, perhaps controversially, and I hope some of you maybe think differently than me, that I don't know if we're winning in the big picture. I think a lot of our dreams are losing right now, that we are changing rooms on the Titanic. But I do believe that we get to choose what we do while we figure out if we're sinking for sure or not. Now is a time when we defend each other. We defend our dreams. We learn to do risk assessment for real, and we learn to live with fear and live anyways. We learn to live with numbness and overwhelm and low morale, and we live anyways. And we remind ourselves of everyone who has lived through backlash and repression, and who has said, I will make a community by defending it. Now is when we learn from those who have been under attack for a long time. We learn from those who are doing the work day in and day out, as we heard from Rise today, from the social justice team today, who are doing the work day in and day out. They remind us that all dreams of justice are worth defending. When I find it very hard to believe in a dream of justice, I often turn to ancestors or to those whose work has come before mine, those who I feel like I'm in a legacy of. I want to share some words by the longtime economic justice organizer, James Tracy. You may have heard these before. James's words: I'm always suspicious of parties, of Republican ones, Democratic ones, green ones, red ones, old ones, first ones, third ones. My infantile disorder, a simple love of the people that burns like a ballot stuffed in a Molotov cocktail. I have often clamped a clothespin on my nose and punched the Chad, pulled the lever, but I really believe that every cook can govern. Behind every "hi, can I take an order?" lies a hidden analysis. Hammers and nails can build more than luxury lofts. Teachers aren't the reason schools fall apart. War is the cardiac arrest of the state. Junkies and crackheads have names besides junkies and crackheads. The rattle of spare change cups might be the tune of a new revolutionary song. Robin Hood was not the only one who was right. Harriet Tubman was right. The road to freedom must sometimes be walked with a rifle. John Brown was right. There is more to life than what is painted white. Ricardo Flores Magón was right. Borders are just scars. Lucy Parsons was right. A woman's place is front and center in this fight. Eugene Debs served his country better from prison than any president has from the White House, and the most important choices we make are on the days between elections. Picket lines walked, homes unevicted, communities mobilized, cynicism conquered, empires deleted, meanings for once not lost in translation, kindness given, love made. To that extent, you know, we all vote every day. So this February, in this time between elections, in this month where we think about justice as Unitarian Universalists, when we think about kindness given, love made, I'm also thinking about the fight for driver's licenses here in Massachusetts that we won in the fall. It took 20 years to pass that law, and it's not a law that's perfect. We now have to worry about the Registry of Motor Vehicles sharing the data they might collect with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And it doesn't change everything for everyone. And it will change some things for many people. It will mean that people without immigration status can drive without fear. It means that people will not get pulled over for driving without a license and end up in court, risk being arrested by ICE and deported just because they drove their kid to school, or they drove to work, or they drove their parent to a doctor's appointment. On election day, when we defended this law on the ballot here in Massachusetts, my father-in-law was visiting us, and he told the story of how many years ago he didn't have papers, he didn't have immigration status, and he didn't have a driver's license. And how his sister found an RMV in a very rural place, many states away, that didn't bother to check immigration status. And so he had to open a whole bank account there and got utilities bills in his name there and used his sister's address near there. And how he told himself and his family that he didn't think it was possible to have a good life in the US if he couldn't drive. And so they would try this, and if it didn't work, then they would probably go back to Bolivia. But it did work. And so they stayed. And so he could be there in our house on the day that we won licenses for all in Massachusetts. I try to get my head around how many changes take 20 years and how many changes take more than 20 years. Take the work of generations on generations and on generations. And we don't even know what will win in our lifetimes or in our children's lifetimes or theirs. That kind of dreaming, that kind of voting every day, that kind of protecting the dream. We heard words from Assata Shakur, poet, political activist, member of the Black Panther Party and Black Liberation Army, survivor of incarceration who now lives in exile in Cuba. As our reading, she has surely lived through so many of these things. She writes, "I believe in sunshine, in windmills and waterfalls, tricycles and rocking chairs. I believe that seeds grow into sprouts and sprouts go into trees. I believe in the magic of the hands and the wisdom of the eyes. I believe in rain and tears and in the blood of infinity. I believe in life. And if I know anything at all, she says, it's that a wall is just a wall and nothing more at all. Can be broken down. I believe in living. I believe in birth. I believe in the sweat of love and the fire of truth. And I believe that a lost ship steered by tired, seasick sailors can still be guided home to port. I believe that a lost ship that may or may not be the Titanic can still be steered by tired, seasick sailors, can still be guided home to port, can still be guided by our dreams of justice and a better world. Blessed be, and may it be so.